The content discussed on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as financial or mortgage advice. Always consult with a licensed professional before making any decisions regarding mortgages or financial matters.
Welcome to the Canadian Mortgage Show. Here are mortgage professionals Alex Pang and Alex Shanks to cut through the BS and educate Canadians on all things mortgages and real estate.
Welcome to another episode of the Canadian Mortgage Show. We have a special episode today. We have our first ever guest, Hasan Juma. He's a real estate agent with Oakland Realty in Vancouver. He's been selling real estate for 9 years and is well known for creating educational and current events related real estate content on Instagram and TikTok. In addition to his weekly real estate show on his YouTube channel, he's also a co-host of the Vancouver Special podcast and has been featured on CBC, the Globe and Mail, Daily Hive, and the Vancouver Sun. Hasan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. Super excited to be here. And I just want to give you guys a congratulations on the new show. I feel very honored to be the first one invited on. So super happy to chat with you guys.
Yeah, excited to have you here, Hasan.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So
Sweet.
We have a lot to go through today. It's been a busy week in the news. So let's get right to it. Like, what are your thoughts on the Canadian government raising the insurance cap to 1.5 million and then allowing all first-time buyers to go 30-year amortization for insured mortgages?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? I think from an affordability perspective, there's kind of two ways to look at it. Does a change like this make housing more affordable? Is this going to help real estate prices? It's not. It's going to make it more difficult. It's going to push prices up. Is it going to allow people to maybe have a bit better of a cash flow situation because they're able to do the 30-year amortization now on an insured mortgage? Yes. I mean, they're carrying more debt, right?
How much do they have to pay on the back end?
Right. And I think overall, it's more of a measure for developers to say, look, developers keep building. I think federally, they're looking across the country and BC and parts of Toronto as well, where developers have basically said, look, we don't have any margin left to build. And I kind of view this as when they open it up for all buyers to do on new builds, 30-year amorts, they're basically building in the margin. There's like, here's your 10 to 15% margin. We're building it in by giving that buying power to Canadians. And in the process, it's going to inflate real estate prices. So take on more debt.
That's the only thing is, like, if they've done this and now we qualify for anywhere from 10 to 15% more, then are the prices going to go up 10 or 15% more? I'm glad that they did it to all homes. Like when they came out 3 months ago for just new builds, it seemed really silly.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
When they mentioned that, the new builds, I'm like, it sounds like a big announcement, but only a small segment of the population. So really, it's just much ado about nothing.
Yeah. Even then, it was geared towards the development community where they said this is for first-time buyers, when it really wasn't. This time, they were more forward about it being a supply-side measure. Like, we need you guys to keep building. So yeah, I think overall, like working with clients, your clients are probably more focused on, okay, what's my monthly payment going to be? Versus what's the price, the total value of my mortgage, right? People are probably coming to you and saying, can I afford this? How much is it going to cost me per month? Which is a scary thing because people are going to take on more debt just because they have a lower payment. I think it needed to happen. I can't say that they didn't need to make some change surrounding that, but I don't necessarily think it's going to do anything for house prices. What do you think, Alex?
Well, who's going to answer first is the question.
I'm going to call you. So we're going to go Shanks and we're going to go Pang.
There we go.
Does that work?
Exactly.
Okay. Pang, what do you think?
You hit it right on the head. This is not going to help affordability. This basically means we're allowing you to take on more debt to get the house that you can afford. So we can say goodbye to the house prices coming down. Like all the people who've been clamoring, oh, rates going up, I can't wait for prices to come down. Well, that happened the last 2 years. And it looks like things are changing now where real estate can shift on a dime. TikTok realtors are gonna be like, oh, now's your time to buy before it goes crazy. Not to say that, but historically, that's the way it's been working. It seems like a bailout for developers. And they're trying to buy the first-time buyer vote. The Liberals are really grasping at straws because they know they're not going to win the election. Let's just call it spade a spade.
I think they're trying to grab any vote they can get. I look at a policy like this though, and I'm like, pretty smart, like existing homeowners, are they going to be happy and excited that this basically creates a new floor for real estate and pushes prices up? Yes.
Exactly.
First time buyers, are they going to be happy? Yes. Developers, are they going to be happy? Yes. Investors, yes. So it's kind of a win-win-win-win-win, except again, the consumer takes on more debt and is going to be indebted
forever. The age of first-time buyers now are no longer in their 20s. They're now mid to late 30s.
Yeah.
And taking on a 30-year mortgage, people are going to retire with mortgages into their 70s and such. So,
yeah,
it's not good.
I think it's just the name of the game, especially for us in Vancouver. People always talk about house prices and how are things going to become more affordable. And the reality is we live in such a premier city, one of the best cities in the world. Prices are not going to come down. No. They're not going to come down. There's enough people around the world that want to live here and are willing to put the money in to live here. That's kind of the sad reality. So many things need to work together, including immigration reform, which we're starting to see now. So many things have to come together for there to even be a semblance of more affordability. Prices is.
I had this question a little bit later for you, Hasan, but let's just dive into it because we're talking about it right now. We know New York, China, the prices there do not compare to here. Do you think there's anything that could be done to improve affordability in BC and Canada?
Yeah, so I think number one, like I just kind of mentioned, there's some level of immigration reform. Realistically, I mean, Canada was grown through immigrants. We've been a country that's been very open to immigrants, but the reality is when people come here from other countries, they settle in a couple of places. They want to be in Toronto where the jobs are. They want to be in Vancouver where the jobs are. And I think they're starting to be more restrictive about how many people and perhaps what professions they're bringing to the economy from a professional standpoint. I think that's important. That kind of helps on the demand side. On the supply side, it's quite difficult because we are already 5 to 8 years behind from a supply perspective, and it's not getting any better currently and over the next couple of years. So I think that's where we struggle. Now we clamp down on immigration, but what's that going to do for the economy? What's that going to do for productivity, right? What do you guys think?
It's not going to be good. We already know what they've said. We talked about it last podcast as Lululemon said, if you don't let us have foreign workers, we're not going to do our work here. Yeah. Everyone wants cheap labor. And that's the issue I see with it. My idea of how to make stuff affordable, we need to get access to the outer skirts cities easier. It's so hard for people to get to their jobs, which are in the cities. I think we need to spend more money on infrastructure for high-speed travel. If you go to Japan, the cities are expensive, the outskirts are super cheap, and everyone can get to work in 30 minutes. That's where I think the government needs to spend some money so that people can live in, say, Hope, even though Hope prices are crazy now too, but actually get to work in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah, good point. I think also kind of along those lines is wage growth. Yep. I don't think we talk enough about wages. We're always talking about house prices, but the reality is our wage growth has not kept up to the pace of real estate prices. Maybe the government looks at it and offers incentives to businesses to pass down some of those incentives and savings to employees so they can make more money. Yeah. You mentioned the transportation thing. Hearing more instances now of companies like Amazon requiring their employees to come back into the office. Yeah. They want their employees back for 5 days. And so that whole stretching out the city, it would have made a lot of sense if they were still open-minded to being able to work remotely. But now it's just the CEOs and the execs that say you can work from anywhere. Yeah. But everyone else, they want to come back. So it makes it more difficult.
Funny that you mentioned Amazon. I actually talked to my wife about this. When they were mentioning bringing everyone back full time, it wasn't for the workers. It was a pure economic move because they know that there's a bunch of people that don't want to go back, and it's a way for them to lay themselves off without having to pay severance. And it's a brilliant move from a business.
Oh, wow. So they wanted people to be like, I don't want to work here anymore?
Instead of laying off 30 employees and having to pay, gobs of money for severance, they underhandedly strategize that way. We're going to do the return to work, and you can return to home, but you need to be in a location like Seattle or a different city. And slowly people weeded themselves out, like, screw this, I'm going to find another job that's remote. which, I mean, it's a brilliant move for
I see it
Amazon.
both ways though. Yeah, I see it both ways, to be honest. Like, I feel like maybe the workforce has gotten a little spoiled
Hmm.
with the work
Look
from
at
home. Like, just the
the
fact we're having a
government, the
conversation of,
Oh,
government employees.
yes.
Oh
right?
my
Yeah.
God.
I have
Oh,
no,
are we going
I
to
have no
talk about that? Are we
sympathy
going to
for
get into
them.
that?
They're all protesting over 3 days back at
And
work. I'm like, please.
well, did you hear that 25% of Canadians work for the government
Yep.
now?
Yeah, I think it's 1 in
Like,
400.
it's
Yeah,
wild.
We
it's
talked
Yeah,
about it on a
it's
previous episode. I believe it's CRA. This is
one
just
in four
CRA.
thousand.
1 in 400 in Canada, and in the States is like 1 in 7,000, something like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a gentleman on TikTok. He does some really good videos surrounding that. I can't remember who he is, but man, the amount of employees we have at CRA for the amount of residents we have in Canada, I won't even get
well,
into
it's
it
not like
because
our
I have
services improved or anything.
things going on with those guys right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, exactly. It seems like we just have too much bureaucracy in the government. It's just too bloated. When you look at job
Yeah.
employment graphs the last couple of years, employment growth has not grown in the private sector. If anything, it's stayed flat or even gone down. Whereas in the public,
hmm
it's just rocket to the moon. Like,
Yeah. It's just added
yeah.
It's a,
costs. It's just all
it's a
costs,
scary
right?
thing. Like I would say Canada's built on immigration and self-employed people. We have just been
hmm
shitting on self-employed people, like making it harder for them, taxes, everything. And it's like we need
Yeah.
people like to go and do other things, brings innovation, brings people wanting to do more things. We know in rates and the government, everyone's been working against each other. Everyone's been doing the opposite thing.
Yeah. It's unfortunate to see, like, bringing this back to real estate a little bit. Like, I have clients that, they've been investors in Canada for a long time. And over the last year or so, a lot of them have decided to disengage in
Yeah.
Canada and put investment money elsewhere, specifically in the US. As a Canadian, you don't love to see that. Like, people lose faith in our country and putting money into the country. And, it only gets worse as they create more policies that push the investor out. And we're going to see what that's going to do to our economy over the next couple of years because, like we talked about, immigration reform, that's what's kind of propped up our GDP overall. We just allow a whole bunch of people in the country that spend money, but per capita we're down. And so I hate to say it, but I think over the next couple of years, things are not going to be very pretty. And tell me if you agree with me. I think this is part of the reason why we're going to see aggressive rate
Mhm.
cuts moving forward over the next meeting. What do you guys think, like rate cuts wise? Obviously, the Feds in the US did a 50 basis point cut. What do you guys see?
I think
I'll
go
defer.
ahead.
I'll talk about that because I was going to say what's going to do with rates coming down. I think everyone that's cheering for these lower rates and everything, they also don't understand what that means for our economy. It does not mean that houses are going to be able to be bought. Everyone's going to have money again. It's not going to be the same time as COVID where it was kind of like free money. You still had your jobs where if rates have to come down aggressively, it means that jobs are going to be getting lost. I saw a stat of in 2007, the Fed cut the first time at 0.5%, and that is the same here in 2024. And we obviously know what happened after 2007, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
great for our economy. That's where, to me, I always tell people it's nice. You have a job right now, you can qualify for everything, but what's the plan if anything goes wrong? You got to be thinking
Mm-hmm.
about worst case scenarios.
That's why we're probably not seeing as much activity as you would expect. Like we've already seen 3 rate cuts. Naturally, you think from a law of, supply and demand means when your borrowing costs are lower, then that means you're going to supercharge the market. But we haven't seen that. Even with when we're expecting 2 more rate cuts at the end of this year, are we going to see a crazy liftoff in housing? Maybe. But like Alex was mentioning, people are now shifting more towards, am I even going to have a job next year? If people are worried about their jobs and whether they're going to be laid off, they're not going to be looking at buying.
That's what I
Mm-hmm.
see in
Yeah.
Reddit. People trying to close homes, and they're like, "I just lost my job," and it's just like, this is like
Yeah.
that's so scary. To
Yeah.
have bought this house, you finally made the dream happen, and then you lose your job.
Yeah. You see the craziest stories on Reddit, eh?
Yeah, it's
Like that's where you see all the crazy stuff out there. But it's happening, right? It's stories of what's actually happening. Yeah, like I see it specifically in the new construction market and people trying to close on pre-sales they bought 3-4 years ago and lots of struggles in that department. I get people reach out to me to sell their assignments and the price that they paid for it. I'm very much a black and white realtor, right? Like I don't sugarcoat anything, and I often have to tell them that if you do want to sell this right now,
That's where you got to go.
you're taking a 50 or a 75 or $100,000 hit depending on what the product is. I'm a little bit optimistic activity wise, like moving forward. I don't expect gangbusters, but what I'm feeling in the market now, definitely a lot more properties are getting accepted offers on them. There are more buyers kind of quietly back. We won't really see this in the numbers for another few weeks to a month, but it's not going to be frenzy. I think it's just going to be back to that sort of pace that we were used to, like prior to COVID. As rates kind of get down into that neutral point, we'll probably go back to a housing market, like not an investment market, but a housing market.
That would be nice.
I need to move.
Just, you have to buy a house, fix it up, and force equity. Go back to what real estate was, not just buy something and be like, hey, it's worth $100,000 a month later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, during the frenzy of COVID when there was free money and essentially free borrowing, remember that craziness where people were buying things subject free? And as advisors on our end, we couldn't legally tell them that you can go subject free. I've always told them you're 99% good on your down payment income credit. The 1% drawback is if the property you're buying is a piece of crap, right? Like if there's a special assessment, poly B piping, whatever, that can derail things. I'm glad those days are over.
Sight unseen. Didn't even view the properties. I would go in and do like a video, a tour like I would do on TikTok, and they're like, I'll take it. Just based on my word, right? And it's like,
so crazy.
Because they don't want to get sick. Yeah. They don't want to get sick because we're all scared about this giant monster or whatever. But then they're like, I'll buy this 1.3.
200 grand over asking.
Without looking at it.
Yeah, there was some
that's, I mean,
major FOMO.
Appraisals going in in an upwards market. It's not too horrible on the appraisals, but like what you were saying in the pre-construction, like what are you seeing on have you hearing like appraisals come in bad?
100%. Like especially downtown Vancouver condos, I would say, like a lot of luxury builds over there that completed in the last year to 18 months, appraisals coming in 400,000 less than asking, developers having to turn into
borrowers,
lenders,
lender takebacks or whatever.
These guys close on deals. Really significant stuff, and that's also why the developers are having such problems right now. And then you have the cities that are increasing development fees at such an odd time. And I think that's another reason why the federal government is doing what they're doing, because they're thinking, man, we need to build these 4 million homes in the next 5 years, which they're not going to be able to do in the best of times. But we're going to try and do this now. And we're seeing cities raise the fees and get in the way of development. The person they're going to put it on is the buyer to take on more debt and prop up this debt bubble we all live in. Right?
We talked about it in a previous episode, how the right hand is the federal government, the left hand is municipalities. The right hand isn't talking to the left, where we all need more housing supply, but the municipalities are starved for tax dollars. Burnaby is the perfect example, where they got 80 million from the Housing Accelerator Fund, and they turned around and jacked up development fees, 50,000 a unit. I'm like, that's not helping housing affordability. And I was proposing, or it was just an idea.
Should be saying, "Hey, I want my money back now."
That's
what the government should be saying.
And this is an idea I just floated across. Like, why can't it be like Alberta? Alberta is building like crazy because their development fees are low. They're inviting investment. And why can't we have the Costco effect?
And then you have I'll throw it out there too. And then you have the provincial government has been antagonizing all the municipalities, right? So you have this by strong arming and say, okay, this is the new zoning. This is small scale unit. This is transit oriented development. You can either choose to do it or you don't have a choice. We're going to do it. And so you have mayors in the cities that are like, we don't like being strong armed here. So whatever control you give us, we're going to hang on to it. It's just, again, we talked about bloat of all the different layers. I don't like one entity having too much power. So I like when the power is divvied up. But man, it gets messy.
Especially
really
problems
quickly,
are when the powers get divvied up, no one can agree on anything, and they just end up canceling each other out. And as a consumer, they get screwed.
We just don't have, to me, it's like we want people there, but why are we not getting to vote on more of these things? It's all in the Senate. We have to vote on that. And then they get to do it. Where it's like, why don't we get to be part of some of that? To say, I want to know that my city can build 500,000 homes in the next 2 years. Like, I think that should come back to the people more.
Yeah, I'm scared of the people's words because what they've done over here, like anytime they go to public forum, it's basically added a year or two to the process, right? And so now they've actually removed the public
Too much
forum part,
bureaucracy.
and they're
Yeah.
saying at the beginning,
That's
yeah, they're saying when we do our OCP every 5 years and we update it, then you can give your input. But on individual choices,
it's
we're just going to make the decisions. And I think now who you select to be the provincial government is more important than
yeah.
ever because they hold more power than ever too, right?
You
So,
actually
That's
touched
I
on
don't think the
this. Yeah.
younger generation don't realize that.
So Hassan, you touched on this earlier, but now that BC has decided to rezone the whole province, right, 4 to 6 units, do you think we'll see a significant increase in those building types in the next few years?
yeah, I think in certain cities, 100%. Some cities are just more open-minded to it, and some cities are not, right? So, like Vancouver, Burnaby, I think we're going to see a lot more of that activity. There are cities out there like West Van and the North Shore where begrudgingly they participate in the program. The way the province did it is they mandated a whole bunch of things, but then they gave power to the municipalities by saying you guys can dictate FSR, you can dictate how the unit types shake out. And so what cities did that don't want all this development happening is they really restricted those parts. Like I had someone message me in the last couple of days. He's got a 10,000 square foot lot in South Surrey on King George Highway, which is an arterial road. You would think that on a road like that, you can do the 6 units, the max. And he can basically get two PIDs, meaning only two sellable types of properties, duplex with suite and laneway. And so it's not feasible for him to do anything with that lot. And that's just one example. So, roundabout, do I think that this is going to open up a whole bunch of development? I don't think so. The developers I work with, a lot of them in Vancouver and Burnaby, they're sticking to duplexes for now because, there's all that increased cost with the multiplex development. The duplex, they know it, it's tried and true. They can keep their costs down. They know it sells as a product. So I think in certain cities we'll see some, but many cities are not development friendly and they're kind of showing it through the policies that they were allowed to
Yeah,
impact.
I
That's
wonder.
getting lots of calls asking about those things because you see the news of like you're allowed 4 and 6 units, so everyone just automatically thinks like they're good to go, and they start
Yeah.
making some numbers up in their head. They're like, oh well, if I sell this for 2 million, this for 2 million, but when you actually crunch the numbers, like we break it down for all the clients, it's like, hey, you need to be 20% profitable to even get financing on this. You are going to make 5%
Yeah.
profit. So like you haven't looked at what's the zoning cost, what's all this. You're not even allowed to build a fourplex. You're not allowed a sixplex. There's going to be, I think, a sweet spot. I do think certain people are going to like actually make good on it, but it's not going to be every single person's not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and it's so confusing. To be honest, it's really confusing because every city has their own little nuance to it. If I get a phone call from someone in Richmond, it's a completely different conversation than someone calling me from New West. You can't actually do what you're hearing in the news. I think where it makes sense is the lots that are on the frequent bus network where you can do 6 units and no parking minimums. That was easier for a developer to take on. But the land prices
cost-
haven't really
yeah.
come
Yeah, the
down,
numbers still need to
right? So
pencil,
it's
right? The math still needs to math.
exactly. And you're not going to, if the thought was that homeowners were going to be like, oh, I live in my detached home, I'm going to build a fourplex now as a homeowner, that's just not going to happen. And I don't know if you're hearing like the elderly folks, less and less of them are downsizing now too. So it's causing an issue where people can't upsize. Like the people that are in townhomes, the younger families, they want to get into detached, there's not enough choice for them. And then first time buyers are struggling because there's not enough choice for them from those people moving up. People moving up, they refer to it as like golden handcuffs, where you have all this equity, you have a great mortgage rate. Are you going to sell and actually jump into a higher rate? You're not going to do it, right? So
Absolutely. Alex, you want to do the next question?
Got to move to Vancouver Island where you can buy a house and a suite for the same price as a condo.
I was born in Victoria. I'm an island baby.
Yeah.
I should have stayed there.
Yeah.
I wish my family stayed there,
Yeah.
actually. Beautiful.
Even there, that's where I would say the island is going to become a bubble of its own. People from Vancouver are all coming here. They get to sell a place for 3 million. They're like, I got to buy a detached house for $1 million. This is amazing. Which then obviously pushes everyone else that have been born here out of the market because they're like, I can't afford that.
Even on the multi-unit side, a lot of the developers from here, like the hot spot over the last couple of years, Langford,
Yep.
right? And so all the developers from over here buying land over there, building multifamily, you see some projects that, they're expecting to get $1,000 a square foot. And I'm like, it's
Yep.
Langford. And nothing against
Yep.
Langford, right? But, projects are struggling to get that over here. So
Yeah.
developers are not going to build for free. And with these changes, it's going to help. Developers are going to feel like they're being looked after a little bit here. So we should see some more shovels in the ground.
I'll ask this question. It's something that Alex and I actually talked about. What I've started to see more, especially on the island and in Alberta, because we help a lot of people with CMHC financing, is they're buying, developing to keep as a rental. People are going away from the buying and selling. What do you see on your side for that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Here in BC, it's like a different world. In Vancouver, so we're just talking about multiplexes. So as an example, Vancouver, multiplex applications, I can't remember the exact number, like over 100 of them so far, 0 of them for rental.
Yeah.
When you do rental with the multiplex, you can get additional FSR, you can build more units.
Nobody's doing it.
Nobody on that scale is building for rental. On the larger scale, purpose-built rental, I think we are seeing more of that because there's some federal incentives. It's just such a different world. Here, investor-wise,
It's the land cost.
nobody wants to
The
rent
land cost,
Yeah,
it
nobody
doesn't,
wants.
the numbers don't pencil out. Where you can build in Calgary, we just did one. You can build a duplex with top and bottom suites in it. The interest rate on it is 3.5%, 5% down, and it's insanely profitable as a long-term rental. But
Yeah, because the rents are pretty
Yeah.
good, right? The rents are pretty good, and the government supports you as a landlord. That's the other aspect here too. Like, I think what I get from my clients is they'll gladly feed a property a little bit of money every month, knowing that it's going to appreciate in value. But if you feel like you get a bad tenant in your unit and now you're handcuffed and you're stuck, like, nobody wants that when there's other options. For your question, I'm finding less and less people here are inspired to rent their units. I'm finding most of my rental investors now are investing for future generations. They have children, young children, and they're either deciding between an education fund or purchasing a condo, or they're able to do both. But many are choosing real estate because they're saying, look, when my child is 18, I can either give him a Bachelor of Arts degree where he's going to go out, get this degree in 4 years, he's going to be working at McDonald's, or I can buy him a condo, which is tangible, him or her a condo, which is tangible, and I know I'm giving him a head start in life. And so that's the type of rental investor we're seeing now, where they're feeding money as if it's an education fund. But it's really like, okay, my child, I need to set them up because they may not be able to do this in the
That's
future.
what we have for our family. I don't want to go down it too far, but for me on the island, there's not enough space that if I don't have something, my kids may not be able to grow up here. I need to have something so that I know, for one, I hope they want to stay near me, or at least, hey, here you go. I've set you up. You now get to go do something else where it's just not going to be possible for them.
I know for my family, my wife and I, it's probably our, Asian thing is that we're probably going to have to help them with the down payment because, geez, like even if you're buying a $500,000 shoebox in the sky, it's still 100,000 down if you want to avoid the insurance. And what 25 to 30-year-old can save up 100 grand? I don't know how much money you're making unless you're like a software developer that make a ton of money, but it's more and more the norm these days.
That's 100 grand today. Now think about what that is when your child is old enough. So that's the other thing. You save for an education fund where you put it in GICs or whatever. You don't really want to put it in stocks because you don't want to lose the money. So you get a very nominal rate of interest. I'm sure this is crossing your mind. The quicker I can get it into the market, I'm also benefiting off of appreciation. And that way that $100,000 isn't $200,000 later on, right? So these are kind of the rental investor for me now is that young couple. They have young kids. I've done a couple deals this year where I see the young girl, 7 or 8 years old walking in. I'm watching it happen and I'm like, wow, this is an interesting moment because this is the first time she's viewing her future place. She doesn't even know it. She's so young, she doesn't realize it. But that's what I'm seeing on the investment side, rental wise over here. Most of the time when I have investors, their tenants give notice to leave, they call me with a hallelujah and they're like, let's stage this up and let's sell
One
listings
thing I
right now.
wanted to mention too, especially here in Ontario, why we're not that rental friendly right now. A, rates are high because numbers aren't working. And we live in rent controlled provinces. Like when prices went
Hmm.
crazy, as landlords, we're only able to increase rents 2 to 3% a year. We were frozen during COVID. And from the start of when I first rented out one of my basements to now, the market rent has doubled for the same unit. But during that time, I had a tenant a long time for 9 years. His rent only increased less than $200 during that time. So me as a landlord, I've been
Yeah.
shouldering all the risk. I can tell you that that's probably the majority reason why a lot of landlords are now there's less rental investment because there's no incentive right now other than the example that you just mentioned.
And I think when people hear the whole rent control discussion, their guard gets up and they say, well, how can rent control benefit me as a tenant, right? And I think the first thing that needs to be mentioned is when we talk about not having rent control, I don't know, you guys probably agree with me. I don't look at it as we shouldn't have rent control so that we can jack up rents 20%. Like that is not the ultimate goal. You can't do that because you're not going to be able to get the rent and it's going to be a race to the bottom. The whole distinction needs to be made between rent control protects tenants that are already in a tenancy, for sure. But once they make a move, once they either get displaced because their unit gets sold or they have to move to a different area or something happens, that's when rent control is not helpful because now you're obviously going to have your costs jump. You have landlords that they don't want to maintain properties, right? When there's rent control, or they don't want to even invest in them. Here in Vancouver, like there are people out there that are so equity heavy that have so much cash that they'd rather pay the vacancy taxes, they would rather leave their units vacant than actually have a tenant, based on the laws here.
Yeah,
And so there just
you
needs
can't
to
get them out
be
once they're
a
in,
level of
right?
balance, right? It's harder than a marriage. Honestly, I think divorcing is easier. If you have a bad tenant and even if they pay the rent a little bit late, it's so hard, that relationship, where you can go home to your wife and be like, this is
Yeah.
over. You know what I mean? It's that much of a commitment. I think it takes a specific type of individual investor to go down that realm. And at the same time, I have some couple clients that have like 30, 40 condos that are they just keep doing it, but they're
Yeah.
renting it
Yeah.
out and they're just doing what they got to
Yeah.
do. But again, they're thinking for future generations, not just their
Yeah.
children, but like their children and their children and
Mm.
their children,
We
right?
discussed in a previous pod about, you know what, when Argentina removed the rent control, what they did for their supply and their rents. Do you think it could happen here? Well, Alberta already has it, but in BC and Ontario, do you think any politician can get that in without being killed?
I think it can be done. I do know that the conservatives haven't really said, okay, we're going to remove rent control, but they're basically saying we're not in favor of any of the existing government's policies surrounding housing. So we can take that for what it is. But, at the end of the day, rent control is this big bad word that basically is just saying we're going to let the market figure
Mm-hmm.
itself out, right? So we're going to allow more supply get into it. And for sure, if we didn't have rent control, I personally would have a bunch of clients that are choosing to invest in Alberta say, no, I'm gonna put it into
Mm-hmm.
supply here. And that'll keep a damper on prices. It's not gonna bring rental prices down, but is it gonna slow the pace of growth? I think so. And I think there's gonna be more desirable units to live in. You're gonna have landlords actually take care of their properties and not feel the pinch, right? Because, the people that get affected the most are the mom and pop landlords that also have a lot of bills. It's very tough for them as well. And I think there's just that disconnect of people not realizing how difficult it
Yeah,
is for
because
everyone.
rates have been elevated the last couple of years, the numbers don't work as an investor in BC and Ontario at this point from a monthly cash flow perspective. That's why a lot of investment has been going to
Yeah.
Alberta and Calgary in particular, right? They're not a rent controlled
Yeah.
province, and the numbers, even with rates being elevated, still work. Now, I'm seeing that number
Yeah.
slowly
Yeah.
erode because prices have gone up in Calgary. It'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see when rates return to normalcy, how it was pre-COVID, like 3.5%, 4%, whatever. if the money will leave Calgary and return to BC and Ontario once it becomes more attractive.
You can pretty much track Alberta on oil. I have friends that bought in Calgary in 2015. Their prices have just hit that same. Like this, Calgary has had run up in prices before. Nothing the same, but it is now. I do think it will keep going up there as well, just because it's a fairly nice city and everything. But once it gets too much, it's going to go somewhere else again.
From a consumer perspective, the simplest way to think about it is people will move to Calgary to get a discount on real estate, to have a lower cost of living. But if their growth starts getting close enough to ours, people are going to be like, I'm not moving there. I would rather pay the price to be here.
Sucks here.
Well, people move there and they're like, I can't believe I made this choice. And they do come back. So it's all relative, right? At some point, it's going to be worth it to pay the prices here.
But that's where, to me, it's like, I find people need to think a little bit harder. Obviously, I love Vancouver Island. I'm so happy I get to live here. If I didn't buy a home when I was younger, I would have gone to Alberta. I would have worked my ass off. I would have made a bunch of money, and then I would have came back. And that's where I feel like people are just like, I get to live where I grew up, and I want to buy a house without putting any extra work. That's
actually very similar on a separate note. There's a lot of people in the Asian community who are Canadians work and live in Hong Kong during their prime working years because their taxes are so low. But same thing, like you said, they make a bunch of money, but once they retire, they're moving back to Canada and to Vancouver.
You can see in that culture, like you got like that culture works so much hard, like 3-4 jobs, like is the norm. Like it's where us, like my generation would be like, oh, I have to work 5 days a week. That's hard. I remember doing 7 days a week, 14-hour days was the norm.
I can't work remote anymore.
Yeah.
They want me to come back to the office.
Oh man! All right, Hasan.
Well, I got one question for you, Hasan. Well, just are getting near the end of it. We do know, because of everyone, viewers, homeowners, people that own investment, know that you just also had some renters leave a place. Like, give us some insight of like what you're thinking. We know that we don't like rentals right now, and so like let's hear what you're saying.
Yeah, for me, I've had a tenant give notice. Do I re-rent it out? Do I sell the property? There's a few moving pieces. It's a rental property in Coquitlam. I've done well on that property. I bought it in pre-sale, and I do have a couple pre-sales that are coming up in the next 6 to 12 months. So I'm in a scenario where I can re-rent that out. I will have to feed the property quite significantly. And the truth is, these 2 pre-sales coming up, I'm also going to have to feed those as well. So I think there's a lot of clients that are similar to me where they've purchased these pre-sales. They're going to be in these situations. Going back to what I mentioned about how today's rental investor is planning for future generations, I don't have any kids. So for the last 6 months, 12 months, to be honest, I've been thinking, why am I accumulating real estate? Why do I need a handful of properties? How is that going to benefit my life in the future? So for me, what I'm thinking of doing is selling the Coquitlam condo and upgrading my personal residence. I live in a condo right now, but I can maybe get into something larger, nicer, newer. I also think there's going to be some opportunities in the condo market based on people struggling to complete on these new buildings or completing at high rates and they're selling at losses. So my thought is that if I do move off that property, I can take the funds, sell my principal residence, get into something else, probably buy it at 2018 prices, 2019 prices for these condos, get a great deal on it, enhance my living, and then I'm going to be feeding those other 2 properties anyways, and I'll have my investment.
Will you keep some money aside for that opportunity, you think? Like if...
Yeah, so if I have some left over after what I want to upgrade to, I want to get into something, relatively nicer. I want to get something pretty nice. So that's kind of my thought. If you can upgrade where you live, I think that brings you enjoyment. Obviously, that's something that I can actually enjoy.
I mean, that's the thing. I always find people like think real estate investing. I got to make money off it, but it's like this is the place you live and you sleep and you go. You want to be happy there. It's not just like this thing's going to make me money, and that's been the disconnect to me for real estate the last few years. Is everyone's just like, I got to make money. I got to make money. It's like, how does that house make you feel?
Yeah, and the way you mentioned it, that's exactly how I was 2 years ago. I was like, I got to collect another door. I need another door. I want a door. And now I'm like, why? Like, what's it all for? Like, do I need it all? I'd rather just live in a place that makes me feel happy. and, invest a little bit here and maybe put more in the stock market, whatever it might be, and feel more balanced that way.
Well, Hasan, thanks so much for your time. Where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, congratulations on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, at Hasan Juma, and on YouTube, Hasan Juma, Vancouver Real Estate, where I do a weekly show. Search me up, and would be great to connect with you guys.
We'll make sure the links are in the podcast notes so people can follow you. Appreciate all your insight and having a conversation with us.
Thank you guys so much, and best of luck with the podcast. Again, thanks for allowing me to be the first guest.
Thank you, Hasan. This is Hasan Juma from Oakland Realty. I promise you, we will have you back in the future.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kids.
Folks, that's it for the episode. We'll see you next time.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, make sure to follow us. Please give us a 5-star rating. You can even send us an email because we want to know what you guys want to hear about. That's what we're here for. Reach out anytime.